So 5-4, solving proportions. Should be a pretty short section today. The key to solving proportions is that you cross multiply and then divide. So I'm going to put a star by that. So cross multiply and divide. Technically, they'll teach you later on if you haven't learned it already. It's called the means extremes theorem. You could write this if you wanted to. I don't plan to quiz you on this, but this is kind of the way they write it later on. They say for all real numbers A, B, C, and D. So basically, if you have 4 numbers, and you have one fraction A over B, and that equals fraction C over D, comma, then when you cross multiply, I always kind of looked at it like the ichthus, kind of like that fish thing. You're kind of doing that sort of number. But you could take and you could multiply these two. So A times D equals the other two that way, B times C. And that's what I mean when I say cross multiply. So we'll have a proportion, we'll have one ratio, one fraction equaling another ratio or fraction. You do the numerator of one times the denominator of the second, and that equals the denominator of the first times the numerator of the second. Does that look familiar? I'm guessing it does. Okay. Then if you think you need the example, it'd probably be worth writing down. I'll shorten it, but I was trying to think of, well, what could I do? This was about the time we had our last exploratory. So I'm going to write down we had 2 GPS for 10 students, or 10 kids, it's shorter. 4 letters, so 10 kids. When we went geocaching. So then you could say how many GPS for 90 kids. So say we wanted to take the whole middle school at one time. If we wanted to have that same ratio, if we wanted to make it a proportion, we need to set them up. Then, so before we jump to the final answer, which apparently somebody knows, the first thing we could make it into a ratio, 2 GPS and 10 students, so we could do 2 over 10 or 10 over 2, yes? Suppose if we say the ratio is 2 to 10, then it'd be 2 over 10. When people make mistakes, it's often here. Where do I put the 90? Do I put the 90 in the numerator or the denominator of the next fraction? Denominator. And that's something that you need to pay attention to, but I'm going to write it here. So the top was my number of GPS receivers. The bottom was the number of people, the number of kids. So then if I had 10 in the denominator before, 10 kids, I need to put the 90 kids in the denominator, and then an X in the numerator. And you could go back if you wanted to and solve this like we did before. I wouldn't write this down, but you could say, oh, that's 10 times 9. So 2 times 9 will get me my answer. So then you know the answer has to be 18. Is that what you did in your head? So that's shorter a lot of times to do something like that. But it's not always going to be a nice multiplier. Sometimes it might be like 3.48, as your multiplier, is your constant, your k value. In which case cross multiply might be easier. So all right, so to cross multiply, we could write that as, all right, now I have 2 times 90. So numerator of 1 times the denominator of the second equals 10x, denominator of the first one times the numerator of the second. So 2 times 90 gives me 180 equals 10x. And then to solve for x was multiplied by 10, so we divide by 10. And we end up with x equals 18. Seem to make sense? That's kind of the short version. So last example is if we had 4 over 7 equals 22 over x. So the example doesn't have how to set it up, but we cross multiply that same way we do 4 times x. So I have 4x equals 7 times 22. So that's like a 14 and a 140, so 154 equals 4x. Now when we go through and divide by 4, so after you cross multiply, it'll always be a division next. We end up with x equaling 38.5. So I went pretty fast, but we okay on that?